Hello, my name is Patrice Johnson, and I'm a pharmacist and the Director of Partner Success at Medication Management Partners. It's my privilege to talk with you today about vaccines. Like you, the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 virus has impacted my life personally and professionally. I'm committed to helping you to make an educated decision about receiving the new COVID-19 vaccine. Today we'll go over immune system basics, how vaccines work, specifics on the COVID vaccine, and what to expect. Let's start out with some basics. First, a virus is a microscopic entity that invades living cells in order to reproduce. Unlike living organisms, viruses have a very simple composition. There's three parts to a virus. The genetic information, think of this like the recipe to make more of itself. A surrounding membrane, and then a protein coat that helps to unlock the door to our cells. Viruses multiply by unlocking the door to our cells and taking over our cellular machinery to make more of the virus. Remember, a virus can't replicate on its own. It needs a host cell to replicate. Think of it like the virus is carrying around this recipe to make more of itself, but it doesn't have what it needs to do that. If you compare to our homes, the virus doesn't have its own kitchen and groceries and stove to make the recipe. So it's got to unlock the door to our house, use our groceries, our stove to make more of itself. Now, let's talk about how our immune system responds to viruses. Although we could take hours to talk about our immune system, I'll simply review some of the key components important to this conversation. When a virus invades our bodies, our immune system evaluates it. Should this entity be here? Is this foreign to the body? Is it harmful? We've got some superstar white blood cells that really kick into action. First, macrophages. Macrophages are a lot like the old arcade game Pac-Man. These are white blood cells that actively roam around our bodies and swallow up any dead or dying cells, along with bacteria or viruses that shouldn't be there. When macrophages encounter a virus, it's going to engulf or swallow it, but leave a few pieces of the virus, what we call antigens, and signal B lymphocytes to produce antibodies to attack them. Now, our B lymphocytes, another type of defensive white blood cell, will produce antibodies that attack the antigens left behind by the macrophages. Then we've got another defensive white blood cell called a T lymphocyte. They will go back to any cells that were already infected with the virus and treat those, but then also remember what the virus looks like. Remember the antigen so that if it ever comes in contact with it again, our bodies will know exactly what to do. With all the news about COVID testing, you've probably heard a lot about antigens and antibodies. So let's take a minute to define them. An antigen is a substance that causes an immune system response by the body. Antigens are found on the surface of the virus and are unique to that virus, meaning that the antigens that are of COVID-19 aren't the same as the antigens of the flu or the antigens for shingles or the antigens for chickenpox. An antibody is produced by our immune system specifically to counteract an antigen or render that antigen ineffective. So let's take a look at this illustration on the left. The body will recognize pieces of that outer membrane, the protein coating, those spikes as an antigen. In other words, foreign and harmful. It's going to mount an immune response. Now remember, these are the parts of the virus that unlock the doors to our cells and use our cells to replicate. Now what our immune system does is it will make these wishbone-like figures that will block the spikes from the virus so that it can't unlock the doors to our cells. So why are vaccines our best defense against viruses? Well, vaccines give our immune system a chance to build antibodies without getting sick from the virus. How do they do that? Well, they imitate the infection by giving us a weakened or an activated form of the virus. It allows our immune system to recognize it, build antibodies against it, and in doing so, helps to prepare us if we're ever presented with the real virus. That way, we know exactly what to do. Vaccines are like virus imposters. A vaccine will program the immune system to remember a particular disease by allowing it to practice on a weakened or inactivated version of the virus. When you first receive a vaccine and your body creates those antibodies, that's considered a primary response. If later the virus invades your body at full strength, the immune system is ready to respond with a swift and very specific defense. This is called the secondary response. Now, I included this particular graph to show you how the concentration of antibodies here after the first response is reasonable, but notice the concentration of antibodies after the second response or the secondary response. This is what we want with the COVID-19 virus. It's clear that just one dose of, for instance, the Pfizer vaccine is not enough. We really need 2 doses in order to give you the amount of antibodies that are going to be needed to protect us against such a deadly disease. Here's a picture of a virus being attacked by antibodies. The small blue figures that look like wishbones, upside down wishbones, or the letter Y, those are antibodies, and they're all over that virus. That's exactly what we want when we give you a vaccine. We want you to have the strongest possible response to that virus if you ever come into contact with it. This illustration shows exactly what we want to see the immune system do. Have antibodies swarm the virus to counteract the antigen, thereby keeping us from becoming infected with the virus, keeping us from getting seriously ill. Now let's take a moment to talk about the common types of vaccines and how they work. Weakened or live vaccines contain a form of the virus that's been altered by scientists so that it can't replicate sufficiently. Therefore, it can't make you sick. Think of this like a faded copy from a bad copy machine. Your body will still recognize it as foreign and create antibodies so that if you ever are presented with the live virus in the future, your body's ready. These vaccines are some of the oldest vaccines, and they're highly effective at having us create lifelong antibodies. The next category is inactivated vaccines. These are vaccines where scientists have taken the virus, treated it with heat or a chemical, and then purified it so that the virus is no longer active, but your body will still recognize it and build antibodies. A subunit or conjugate vaccine contains just enough of the virus part. So think back to that picture I showed you earlier. A conjugate or subunit vaccine may contain just this protein spike, that membrane, but just a small part of the virus, not the entire virus, just enough that would have your body recognize it as foreign and harmful, and it will allow your body to build antibodies. And then the toxoid vaccines are used for dangerous bacteria like diphtheria and tetanus. These are created by rendering those toxins harmless, then using that as an antigen to give in the vaccine so that your body can create antibodies. These vaccines tend to also require a booster shot as well. So you've probably noticed that there's a common theme here. No matter what type of vaccine you get, they're all designed to stimulate an immune system response so that our antibodies can be created to help us fight off infection. Now let's talk about mRNA vaccines and how they work. mRNA vaccines are the smartest technology thus far. Remember earlier I told you that a virus has 3 parts. It's genetic information in the middle, a membrane, and then a protein coat. So let's take another look at this cross-section of the coronavirus that I've shown here. An mRNA vaccine is going to take a small part of that recipe, and it's going to have our body make just the spike protein. By doing that, once the spike protein is made by our own cells, our immune system is going to recognize it. It's going to recognize it as foreign and harmful and create antibodies to attack it. Keep in mind that the slice of mRNA or the part of the recipe that the vaccine is going to give our cells is only making the spike protein. It's not making the whole virus. It's not teaching our bodies to make the entire virus. It's not doing anything that's going to also alter our DNA or have us get sick. It's not giving us COVID-19. It's merely giving us the instructions, or our cells the instruction to make the spike protein so that our bodies can recognize it as foreign, create the antibodies for it, and then those antibodies will come in handy later if we're ever presented with COVID-19. All right, so there's been some concern about how quickly these vaccines for COVID-19 came to market. What I want to share with you is that although the steps were expedited, meaning that a lot of this got pushed to the front of the line and prioritized, steps were not skipped. So the normal process of having to identify the antigen, testing it in animals, applying for the new drug application, and then going through phase 1, 2, and 3 trials was still the same length of time. So, for instance, in phase 1 trials, that's where we focus on safety in humans, usually 20 to 100 people, and that's really how these studies have always been designed to just ensure that there's no safety issues and to identify if there's any common reactions. Then in phase 2, we expand the number of participants to several hundred to ensure that the dose, for instance, the amount of milliliters needed in the vaccine, make sure we get the dose right, to make sure we also are clear how many doses are needed to get us to that immunity. And then in phase 3 trials, this is when there's several thousand volunteers involved in the trials. One of the unique things about COVID-19 being so prevalent across the world is early during the design of these trials, we already knew that this particular disease was impacting certain populations more than others. We knew that it was terribly detrimental to people in higher age groups. We also knew that people with comorbid conditions like hypertension and diabetes and obesity and lung disease were at high risk for severe COVID-19. And so it was important to include those people in phase 3 efficacy trials because you want to be sure that the vaccine is going to work to prevent serious disease in them. In the phase 3 trials for the Pfizer product, there were over 40,000 people in the study. 30% of those people were of various ethnic backgrounds. 10% were African American, 13% were of Hispanic origin. And in the Moderna trials, there were over 25,000 people in those trials, with 37% of those people being of various racial backgrounds. The other thing about both of these trials is they included people who were obese, people who had diabetes, heart disease, cardiac disease, lung disease as well. So you can be sure that these drugs, these vaccines were tested in the populations that it's so vitally important that they're immunized against COVID-19. The other thing that's important is that in both of these studies, people over 65 were tested for the vaccine. By now, you may have heard that the 2 COVID-19 vaccines that are pending emergency use approval require 2-step dosing. Pfizer product is day 1 and 21 days later. The Moderna product is day 1 and 28 days later for the second shot. Both of these steps are absolutely necessary to build immunity. Keep in mind that what these vaccines are going to do, because they are mRNA vaccines, is they're going to teach your body how to make the spike protein of the coronavirus. Once it makes the spike protein, your body's going to build antibodies to fight off that particular protein because it recognizes it as foreign. It takes about 28 days for the Pfizer vaccine to build that immunity. So understand that vaccination does not mean immediate immunization. Once you get your vaccine, your first and your second dose, it's going to take about 7 more days past that second dose for you to have immunity against COVID-19. What we don't know as of today is how long those antibodies will last. So it may be possible that we'll end up getting COVID vaccines every year or every couple of years. The other thing we don't know is if you receive the vaccine and you build immunity, if you're exposed to COVID-19 in the future, we're not sure if you could still infect other people even though you won't get seriously ill from it. As they continue to study the vaccines and study it in different populations, and we go through more months and years of understanding this virus, which is so new. It's really less than a year that we've been dealing with this. As we get more information, we'll be able to tell about that infectivity and how long antibodies last. Now, in terms of cost, there's no cost for the vaccine. The US government has subsidized the cost of the vaccine. There may be a cost for the clinician to administer the vaccine, but the vaccine itself is free. So let's talk about what to expect when you receive your COVID-19 vaccine. The symptoms that are associated with an immune response are most often experienced in the first 24 to 48 hours after you receive your injection. What was most commonly reported in trials were chills, fatigue, feverish, headache, muscle ache, nausea, and tenderness at the injection site. These symptoms are common when you receive a vaccine and usually dissipate on their own without treatment within 48 hours of the injection. So who shouldn't get the COVID-19 vaccine? People who have had a severe allergic reaction to other vaccines would be considered not appropriate for this vaccine. People who are immunocompromised, under 16 years of age, currently pregnant or nursing, or if you're currently fighting an infection. I'm often asked, can I get sick from getting a vaccine? Well, it takes a few weeks for the body to produce antibodies in memory cells after a vaccination. Therefore, it's possible that a person infected with a disease just before or just after vaccination could develop symptoms and get a disease because the vaccine just hasn't had enough time to provide protection. So I'll use flu vaccine as an example. It takes about 14 days to build immunity after receiving the injection. So if you were exposed to the flu right before you got the flu vaccine, then it's possible that yes, you indeed had the flu. The other thing is if simply after you got the flu vaccine, you just felt a little feverish the next day or had chills and it went away on its own, that wasn't the flu. That was simply you having a symptom related to your body building that immune response. One other thing I'd like to share about the flu vaccine in particular is that it has about a 40 to 60% effectiveness rate depending on the year. And that's because the flu vaccine is created by identifying the strains of flu that were circulating the previous year, using those as the antigens to make the flu vaccine for the next year. If there's a new strain of flu that circulates that next year, unfortunately, it may not have been included in the vaccine you received, therefore you may not have been protected against it. The availability of the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine are giant leaps towards us stopping the pandemic. The thing is, it's not the only step we need to take. We need to continue to protect ourselves and others by using every tool in the shed. We've got to continue wearing masks, continue social distancing, continue to wash our hands, and use sanitizer when hand washing is not available. Continue quarantining when it's required, and getting vaccinated. It will take a significant part of the population getting vaccinated so that we can truly end this pandemic. Receiving a vaccine is a personal choice. I understand that. And I hope that this educational program has helped you to understand how vaccines work, answer some of your questions, and give you information on what to expect. Thank you for listening. Stay well.